Hey, this is Kristofer Maddigan, the composer of Cuphead. You are listening to Pixelated Audio, episode 92.
Welcome back to the bi-weekly video game music and retro gaming podcast, Pixelated Audio. I'm James, and this is Brian.
How's it going, guys? A lot of energy in that one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, today we're going to be talking about Cuphead, listening to the music together. I'm excited.
Yeah.
It's our first time doing, well, not our first time, but it's been a long time. I think the last time we did a game that's this new was Horizon Chase.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right. We have covered some recent releases.
Right.
This is going to be a little bit different. I like that this game still has a very retro feel and look to it, so I don't think it's going to feel that odd.
Yeah. I do want to say welcome back.
Oh, thanks.
You were missed last week.
It was odd being out for an episode, and then listening to it, I thought it turned out great, but it definitely was weird not being on it. Yeah. So unfortunately, that was the first time that I've missed an episode, but it's almost been 100 episodes. So.
Yeah. We got a few more to go, and then we're going to hit the big 100.
Yep, triple digits.
Yeah. Looking forward to seeing what we're going to plan out, because we haven't thought of anything yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that track that brought us in was the introduction of Cuphead, composed by Kristofer Maddigan.
I mean, such a great track. Like you said, very high energy. It's just so funny that the beginning of this track just reminds me of like those Chips Ahoy commercials, which obviously, is pulled from other music. But I just thought it was so great. The instruments are so crisp and amazing, and there's so much variety and transitions going on in this track.
Totally.
That I mean, just like any other track that starts out a game, it really gets you pumped and excited and ready to play.
For me, it's that it's got to be the brass section, the horns, like the saxophone at the end there. That solo is pretty rocking.
Yeah,
I love that. But
I really love the way that the track really progresses towards the end there. It's just so good.
Yeah, but that trombone, that I guess it's like a plunger trombone, has it just squeals. It comes in. It's so raunchy, and they're having a lot of fun. You know that these guys have a big grin on their face when they're playing the music. It's excellent.
And one thing that reminded me too of another game that we've covered is Grim Fandango, which had this very jazzy swing. I mean, it was a little bit different, but I really liked doing that episode, so I'm very excited about diving into this one today.
Well, the Grim Fandango episode was released exactly 2 years. Was it 2 years or 3 years ago?
Oh, was it? Oh, it's
2
right.
years ago,
right around Halloween. Yeah.
Yeah, that this episode is released.
What a weird coincidence.
Yeah. So, this isn't like a scary game at all, but we wanted to release it on Halloween just because we did.
Yeah. Well, it has a cautionary tale, I guess, to it, so I think it fits.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if Yude-kun wasn't scary enough for you.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about Cuphead. This game is an action platformer released on the Xbox One, Steam, and Windows 10 September 29th of this year, 2017, developed and published by StudioMDHR.
Yeah, and this is the first game for StudioMDHR, which is a Canadian-based indie game developer, which was created by brothers Chad and Jared Moldenhauer. And like most small teams, this game has been in development since 2010.
Yeah, I remember seeing... I think it was some kind of PlayStation event. Maybe it was like E3, like 2-3 years ago, maybe. They were showing Cuphead, and I was like, oh my God, like, look at this. Looks exactly like cartoons of the 30s. Like, oh my God, this is so awesome. Steamboat Willie, it's coming to like a video game near you.
Right.
And then like it disappeared. And I was like, what happened to that game? And then sure enough, like, I think, few months later, this last E3, we saw some more information on it, some more movies, some more videos of gameplay, and I was like, oh, it's actually a real thing.
Yeah, no, I definitely heard about it as well when it kind of flared up and was really excited, but then it did kind of fade away, and I was kind of thinking, well, I guess maybe this isn't a thing anymore, but then it definitely spiked right back up, and now it's just everywhere. Like, everywhere you go is Cuphead this. It's really great. I'm really happy to see a small studio get this type of excitement over their game.
Right. This wasn't their first time doing a game kind of like Cuphead.
Right.
I guess in 2000, they had started working on a game very similar. Maybe it was like the same kind of premise, but they didn't have the skills or the tools really at their disposal to accomplish what they had in mind. So it's at least not the way they envisioned. So the good thing is they didn't give up. They kept with it, and we got Cuphead today. So
yeah, and I guess they cited the success of Super Meat Boy back in 2010 as some of the inspiration to decide to get back into development and really see this game through. And we have Cuphead 7 years later.
Yeah, well, you think about 2000 wanting to create a game, and a lot of the middleware, the Game Maker Studio, and I'm not saying this was made in Game Maker Studio. I don't know what it was made in, but
I think it was made in Unity.
Maybe in Unity, yeah. But like stuff like that, like Unity wasn't even around yet.
Right.
At least I don't remember that.
Yeah, things have gotten so much easier for such a small team to, get something that's, partially built and customize it, or, so you don't have to start from the ground up. And, maybe this would have been in development for 15 years or
yeah,
something.
I mean, now you can have a dream to make a game as like a single person, and you can do it. That's like a reality now, and that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, well, and Super Meat Boy was made by two people as well, so maybe that was also mixed into the inspiration of another really small team of people made a very successful and fun game that people really liked.
Yeah, so two guys the way they divided up the work was that Chad did all the artwork and animation while Jared worked on the gameplay and other elements of the game. And then to round this out, they hired a developer, an animator, and obviously Kristofer Maddigan to help bring this game to life. And this music definitely brings the game to life.
Oh, I mean, as far as the look of this game, it's gorgeous, and it's something you've probably never seen before in the game world, but this music really helps bring this game to the forefront of what's going on today.
Yeah, like we're big chiptune guys, big chiptune fans, but there's some, like, it's not every day you see a video game that was scored like this, and you have this amazing, like, you know, swing, jazz, big band, Dixie, kind of all thrown into one soundtrack. And it has a very kind of vaudeville kind of sound to it. And I think we're going to hear some really, really great tracks as we get through the rest of the episode.
Yep.
So let's listen to another one. This is called All Bets Are Off, composed by Kristofer Maddigan for Cuphead.
You just heard All Bets Are Off, composed by Kristofer Maddigan for Cuphead.
I love this one.
Yeah, super smooth.
God, that sax killed it.
Yeah, I know you have a love for the saxophone.
Right. Well, I played Barry for, pretty much all through school and into college and stuff. I loved it. I think it's so smooth. It just has this really great tone to it. The actual studio that did the recording nailed it also.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, just everything is so clean. Those horns kind of echoing that sax. They come in, they kind of squeak and squelch, and it just has this really kind of like a casino vibe going on. I loved it.
Oh yeah, and I loved how there was this feeling of a storytelling aspect between the saxophone and the horns and all that. Like it felt like, even though there weren't any words, that there was some type of story that was going on, and that like the instruments knew each other, and I really liked it. It was just a really unique feeling for me, and like you said, this track is so smooth, and it just gave you a really great feeling.
Right, and it did feel like, all bets are off. Like something's going down. There's something shaking down.
Oh, and that swell at the end too.
Oh yeah.
That was like made it really feel like what's coming. I don't know.
Kristofer Maddigan. We're gonna be talking to him later on, so I'm super excited to get some insight on some of these tracks and the process.
This is a jam-packed show for sure.
Oh yeah. But real quick, he is a member of the National Ballet of Canada Orchestra for the last 7 years. He's also performed live with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, Hannaford Street Silver Band, the Canadian Opera Company, Toronto Concert Orchestra, the Thunder Bass. I mean, I could go on. This guy has a very impressive resume, and he's been doing it for a long time. So I think the developer really knocked it out of the park finding this guy.
Right, StudioMDHR, they definitely probably did their research, and they got an amazing composer that worked so perfectly for the style and the feeling of the game that they were going for. So it was definitely a case of finding the perfect part, for
the perfect companion to this game. All right, so a lot of games that we talk about on the show, the story really doesn't matter, and in this, it's not the focal point, but it does play an important role on why you're doing what you're doing.
Right. And in that sense, it feels like one of those 30s cartoons where the story was there for the animation to exist. But this has so much charm, and it's hard not to fall in love right away. So this game takes place on Inkwell Isle, where two mischievous brothers, Cuphead and Mugman, live, which, if you haven't seen them, their names describe their look perfectly.
Yeah. One's a cup, or one's head is a cup, and one's head is a mug.
Yeah. And then they're watched over by a giant tea kettle named, you guessed it, Elder Kettle. So
awesome. So really goes with the Steamboat Willie kind of thing, like, you know, making steam.
Then that's one thing that's great too, is that in those old cartoons, so many different things could happen. Whereas in more modern cartoons, there's like a sense of realism.
Yeah.
And back then, a cup with a face, it was totally viable and it totally worked, and you could fall in love with it.
Like, what else is there?
Right, right.
Like an anvil or something with a face.
There could be, yeah. So they're warned by Elder Kettle not to go to the Devil's Casino, but they go anyway, and they get on a huge winning streak. Such a streak, in fact, that King Dice gets the devil himself involved, and a wager is made. So if the brothers can win again, then they'll win the casino.
Like, all the money and everything.
They'll own it, and it'll all be theirs. But if they lose, then they lose their soul, which is, the classic thing that the devil's after. But of course they lose.
Yeah, and they roll a snake eyes.
Right. So that leads them to beg for mercy. And the devil tells them, well, if you can collect all the other contracts for the other beings that have lost their souls, then I might let you off the hook. So, and after their turn...
And that's might.
Yeah. So you definitely don't want to mess with the devil.
Right.
So, and after their turn loose on their quest, they go home and tell Elder Kettle what happened. And he says, take this potion, which will allow them to shoot projectiles out of their fingers and kind of give them a fighting chance.
Yeah, it's dangerous to go alone.
Right.
I really liked that the developers didn't use the damsel in distress kind of trope, because the game itself, I don't think needs that. It's not just like this cookie cutter. I mean, it's a simple, kind of story, it's simple kind of plot, but I don't think it needed to just follow the standard, go save the, Miss Cuphead kind of thing.
Right.
And it's cool that it's more of a cautionary tale than almost like a fable in a sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And the look and all that, and the two brothers and the inanimate objects that are alive gives it that cautionary fable, which I thought was great. And I mean, there's only so many railroad tracks you can tie women to in these old cartoons.
Right.
So, but like we've talked about on the show a lot, this game focuses on the gameplay over the plot, which also gives it that really early retro feel. And we've talked about this a lot, where the plot in a lot of the games that are on the show really are they're not there for any reason at all.
Right. Unless it's like an RPG where, even there,
there's still a lot of filler.
Little gray area there. But let's get back to the music. This next track is called Treetop Trouble, and we'll be right back. Another killer track. Man, this whole soundtrack is so good.
Oh, yeah. And we have so much more good stuff to go.
Right.
But first, we wanted to talk a little bit about the gameplay. So we have a special guest today that probably knows the gameplay better than anyone out there.
Right. So we want to welcome Piotr Delgado, also known as the Mexican Runner, or TMR for short. So thank you so much for joining us today to tell us about the gameplay of Cuphead.
Hello, guys. Thank you for having me here. It's an honor to be here in the program.
Awesome. Yeah. No, it's... Who knows the gameplay better than this guy, right? So Cuphead right now has a bunch of people running the game.
Right. It's everywhere from, just about everyone's playing this game right now. It's all over the place with, people casually playing it, but then there are some people out there that are speedrunning it, and it's just insane. It's amazing.
Right. So we've asked the Mexican runner to come on and talk about the gameplay.
Yeah. So as you know, I'm the Mexican runner. I have done a lot of things like beating all the NES games.
Right.
Which was really crazy in a project that I call Nesmania. But I'm also known as a very competitive speedrunner. And one of my recent projects it has been Cuphead. And what is crazy is that the game just released less than a month ago. And since the game is that new, every day as a speedrunner, are being found new strats. So the people who adapt the quickest, have the big opportunity to be very competitive. So I have really been playing the game a lot, and it's really fun. All the new findings, because there's two ways of playing. One is the casual way that you mentioned that is very enjoyable as well, but there's another way of playing a video game that is asking more of the game, playing over and over and over and over again just to...
It's a totally different way to experience the game.
Yeah, and we've mentioned it a few times on the show. It's, I do it not to TMR's level, but I do some speedrunning as well, and it's so addictive, and it's not just I think of it as kind of like learning to play a song on the guitar. You don't just kind of fumble through the song and play all the notes and you're like, okay, I'm done. You practice it and you get really good at it, and then you kind of master it. And it takes the game to a whole new level of enjoyment and just replayability.
Right. So let's back up here real quick and talk about this track. For me, this one is super fun. It's like an old-time saloon. It's really just like a piano playing both the bass and the melody, and then you get the little kind of like wood block and also a kind of like a jazzy drum kit.
There's that little washboard in there too that just comes in, and it's. This game has a unique look to it, and the soundtrack has a very unique feel, and I think they really work together so greatly. And like you said, it has that kind of old-timey saloon bar, some guy just mashing away on the piano, and there are imperfections in it too, which is really great.
Well, I feel like this is as the bar fight is starting to really take off.
I think the music is something that makes really great the game. With this track, I could just close my eyes. I didn't have the need to have any visuals to feel what was going on. We could clearly hear there was some tension in there, like some hurry to escape or something that. And that is what makes great the game. Each track has personality, especially this one. You're in constant need of where do I hide? Where do I go? And that gives life to the game itself. It's a very big part of the game, the music.
Yeah, and we've talked about it before. This soundtrack is very different than many games.
Well, in this game in general, really, on paper, it's similar to a lot of different things, but in person and just seeing this game and playing this game, it's no wonder why so many people have gravitated towards it.
Right.
just the song itself has like a battle feel, and when you fight the bosses, like you feel like you're getting ahead, and then they do different phases or different attacks, and now you feel like you might be on the defense, and this track definitely had all those earmarks in there.
Yeah, a way to make a great game, like just listening the audio. Somebody doesn't have to tell you, oh, this is from a game. Like you could clearly think, oh, maybe this is from a movie or something.
Right.
It's just that great. Very well done. The composing and the execution, the recording, that it just shines by itself. And the fact that it's part of a whole, a video game together. Wow, it's just crazy. Like the animation they put, it's just wow.
Yeah, so you're a fan.
Wow.
I'll take it as that.
I'm a fan, since the first time I played the game, I was like, wow, this is like watching a cartoon.
Right.
Not watching a cartoon, it's like you're playing, like you decide
are the
where
cartoon.
the cartoon goes.
Except for it's not like those horrible what am I thinking of, like Dragon Slayer, you couldn't tell what you were supposed to do because it looked so much like a cartoon.
Right.
And this one is, I mean, it's so well executed that you know what's going on, you know what you need to do, and it's hard but fair. And I think that's one thing that's really great about this game too, is that it's not just like, okay, I'm going to just blast through this and be done. Like, you're going to have to spend some time with it.
Right. So actually, let's kind of go back over to the gameplay. Essentially, this is just a continuous boss fight. You're just doing boss fight after boss fight after boss fight. Now, there's some little platforming elements thrown in, kind of like midpoint areas that you can clear for a time and extra coins and stuff like that. But essentially, the game, its sole focus is really on those boss fights, like some kind of almost like Mega Man boss fights, where there's like a pattern. There is like some kind of like special kind of unique characteristic to that boss that you have to figure out to get through it.
Yeah, and I know that was one of the things that developers were looking into, is they wanted to have a real retro feel to it, and not necessarily like this handheld, like a game that holds your hand and kind of walks you through it. They wanted it to be difficult but fair. So you do get infinite lives in this game, and you don't really lose your weapons after your death. So you also can have continuous fire. So you do have some things on your side to help make the game a little bit easier, but it's still so many bosses, so many patterns.
Right. And what's awesome about this game is that you can play it with a buddy. It's 2-player. I think that is probably the best way to enjoy this, unless you're speedrunning, of course.
Yeah.
You can also speedrun with your buddy,
right?
I mean, as long as you have somebody competitive.
Do you want to team up with me
to
on
take
this?
the game to the next level? I could. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's not available. The online co-op.
Trust me, you don't want to play with me anyway. I would totally just bring you down on it.
I was just being polite, No, just kidding. No, I'm sure you're great.
All right, so let's actually talk about some of the characteristics. How does the game actually work?
Well, Cuphead has really great controllers. Like you press left, right, and the guy immediately moves.
It's very tight, yeah.
There has been games done that you press left, right, and it takes like 2 frames so that the character moves. But this one, it was really well done, and you jump and jumps immediately. So that as a gamer, like, it makes you feel good fairness, because like if you die, it's your fault. Like it's because you didn't move quick enough, you didn't react quick enough. Well, yeah, basically. But that is a plus thing, that the controller is very sensitive. You have also a lot of moves that makes really richer. You can dash. You can go down platforms by pressing down an A. Well, the jump also.
yeah.
Yes, I'm so retro.
It reminds me a lot of
Contra.
Contra, or
Metal Slug.
Metal Slug, and any of those games. Gunstar Heroes is one that it really reminds me of, because when you're so you really only have, I mean, the basic controls are, you have shoot and jump, and then you have a dash, like a parry move, right? And you can lock on and fire in any direction, but your character stays still, and that really reminds me of Gunstar Heroes in that sense.
You can also switch between weapons. You have also special attacks, which is really cool, and also a feature they added, like if you go to the mausoleums and beat some ghosts, then you can have supers that if you collect enough cards to make the special move, it really helps you through the bosses fights. So I think the game is really very well done, very well thought. It has a lot of bosses and the fact that you have to learn by trial and error, the patterns, by dying. It makes me feel like the better retro way when I was playing NES, that was the only way of learning.
Right.
There was no.
But that's a good way to feel, right? Like when you discover the way to get through it, you know, that's like that reward. That I think that's what I liked about retro games when I was a kid, is you figure it out and you feel like you're the most amazing thing on the planet. Like you're the only one that figured this out. You know?
Yeah. All the other kids on the playground are like, "Oh man, I'm still stuck here," and they're like, "Well, I got to here because I spent the whole weekend trying to figure it out."
And that is the beauty of this game that. You mentioned earlier that it is hard, but fair. There's different ways of making hard a game, and not only that, you have even a hard mode that you can unlock after you beat the game for the very first time. So for those people who want to experience more about the game, the actual hard mode added serious difficulty to the game. Like if you think you knew the boss fights, then in hard mode, everything goes way quicker, and it's a really added value that makes it feel good.
Yeah. So we were talking about the gameplay and the boss fights and stuff like that. Like, what would you say? Because I mean, the game's primarily boss fights. What would you say your favorite boss fight is? I'm curious.
Well,
because I mean, you're playing them all every day, all the time. You know, like which one when you play, you're like, oh man, this is a good fight. I just like doing this one.
It's very hard to just point one boss fight because
it's like all your children or something. You can't pick one favorite.
No, I could pick one favorite, but I'm not gonna make justice to the game. I'm not gonna make justice to the programmers behind all the bosses. Honestly, every boss feels so unique.
Yeah.
Right.
Unique. Not only for the drawings, but the attacks they have. That every boss is great.
Yeah.
It's just like that. I mean, it's not like you have the generic boss. Like in Super Mario Bros. 3, that it was all the Koopas was kind of the same, just a tiny bit different.
Right.
In this game, every boss is totally different and is totally good. Every boss has its own charm.
Yeah, that was one of the things that really blew me away about this game, was seeing, because at first I just saw people playing it, because I mean it just exploded, and all the bosses were just so vastly different. I mean, not only in just the way that they looked or how they interacted on the screen, like some disappear and come back, and some, are primarily in one location, and you have moving floors, and sometimes it's scrolling, but their attacks were so varied and so different, and so many different themes. It was crazy. And I know that through doing research on this game, that was a very deliberate thing to this, was to have the number of bosses with the variety, and the developers had in mind that they wanted to top the record, which I guess the Guinness record for most bosses in a run and gun type game was 25. So they had planned to top it by an extra 5 bosses.
Wow.
So right from the start, they wanted to have so many different things going on. It was really cool.
I totally agree, and it's really insane because just to think what the programmers did, most of the people don't even talk about it, but they also put the bosses in a certain difficulty that it can show you the game. It starts from some kind of easy bosses that they're still unique, but a little bit easier than the ones in World 2 or World 3. Just in terms of difficulty, I can say that they start from easy to hard. And well, a little spoiler maybe for people who didn't play the game. Once you go to the Inferno and you have the King Dice fight, that is the masterpiece. You have a set of mini bosses inside of a whole boss fight, and that was really smart, in my opinion. And that boss fight as well is very creative. When I played the first time, I was like, wow. So after defeating all the bosses and you think you are kind of done or getting far, then you have this boss that suddenly is 10 bosses in one, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and you have one health meter for all the bosses, and it's not only is it like, it's not like say like Mega Man, where not to reference Mega Man again, but where you have all the bosses are laid out, say in the boss refights, where you have to go through them one at a time. There's a game that is played to get you to those bosses. So I thought that fight alone was just, I mean, like you said, it was a masterpiece. It was a really unique and interesting way to kind of bring this game to a climax.
Right.
Yeah, they definitely put a lot of thought on how to show the game, because one thing is making great bosses and everything, but another is showing like in a movie theater, like you cannot show your best trick at the very start, right? But the thing is that, you know, the music, it starts like, damn, you know, when you just open the game. Yeah, it's just insane when they present the MDHR Studios, I think is the name, but yeah, it's just insane. Like, it immediately catches your attention in the first second that actually you open the game. That's, I don't know how to describe it, but yeah, in my opinion, it's a masterpiece.
They did an excellent job.
Yeah.
Anyways, TMR, want to thank you so much for coming on and talking about the gameplay with us. Where can we find, you know, more about you and kind of like what you're doing?
Oh yeah, well, I do live streams on Twitch, so if you want to follow me there, I usually, well, right now I'm playing this game, but I will be providing new content as, you know, as gaming goes. I'm a very competitive runner, so it's twitch.tv/themexicanrunner. I do also have a YouTube channel, which is, if you just type the Mexican Runner in Google, you will find me. And,
you definitely will.
Well, now I have some stories, so yeah, that's pretty cool. I can say that.
I definitely recommend going back and looking at some of the NES Mania videos, especially the Family Feud one.
Yeah.
That one is a personal favorite of mine.
Awesome.
Yeah, I forgot to mention, but that NES Mania also gave me a Guinness World Record. For the first one completing the whole NES library license.
Yeah, that's truly amazing.
That's crazy.
I will always have that in my heart, and I'm very proud of that. It was a really insane project, totally worth watching. But yeah, thank you guys for having me. It's just really awesome. Thank you for making this great job. I'm a musician myself, and I do love your program. It's very good.
Well, thank you.
And now that you have this game as well, I'm just gonna love it.
Well, hopefully the rest of the show goes well. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insight on the game, and it was a blast having you on.
Yep, thank you.
All right, and we will put links to your Twitch stream in the show notes so you guys can check out the Mexican Runner in action as well. All right, so James, you ready to get into our next track?
Yeah.
All right, so the next track we have is called Porkrind's Shop, and this is a total blast, so let's take a listen.
right, that was Porkrind Shop, composed by Kristofer Maddigan for Cuphead.
This, first of all, Porkrind is this giant pig. It's kind of like, and he looks at you and he's like, "Welcome," and he has an eye patch, and he looks all beefy, which is funny for funny for a pig. No, this track though, at first I thought it was kind of like a sinister, maybe like a bad guy kind of thing,
right?
But I think it is more of like a darker but happy track too. It's kind of got this childlike happiness to it, in there, kind of that little doo-ring, at the on the piano there. I loved it. I thought this was super fun to listen to, and each iteration, each loop of that one section, that dun da 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 da, adds a little bit more percussion,
right?
And it slowly builds as the track completes.
Oh yeah, and like you said, with this track, it feels a little bit dangerous, but a little bit childlike at the same time, which I think fits with the instance of this game where you're buying items. You're kind of in an area that like you probably shouldn't be,
right?
Because Porkrind does not look like a very nice guy, but you're also getting things that are going to help you along the way. So there's this level of excitement. I like this. It felt like the song felt like a little bit more of a classy bar, whereas the previous track with TMR was more of like a brawl fight type, like crazy drunken bar. But this one was, I wrote down classy but kind of dangerous.
Right.
And I really loved when that second iteration came in and they added just that little wood, like the little wood blocks or whatever in there, and it was just such a nice little addition.
It's maybe Clavis or something?
Yeah, something like that. And then the next iteration brought a little bit more. So I liked that it just kind of kept slowly building, and it was a really nice feel.
Right. The piano playing the, really heavy on the bass, and on the low end, just always makes me feel so like, I like kind of old time saloony kind of.
Yeah.
It still has that feeling. I like how you said classy, because it does have a little bit more swank to it, I guess.
Like maybe Porkrind does not allow people to brawl in his shop.
Yeah, he's like the bouncer.
Yeah.
But let's talk about one of the most important things of Cuphead, and that's the animation style, the graphics, because this game wouldn't have been, I think it still would have been fun, but I don't think it would have had the instant, like, eye-catching, the instant thing that makes you want to play it and want to learn more about it, right? And that's the graphics and the design.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this game is probably one of the most beautiful games I've ever seen. Like, I agree. I saw screenshots and stuff like that leading up to the game, but I didn't really see any like full-blown animation. I thought maybe this is kind of like cutscenes, and like I didn't really know what the gameplay was going to be like. But then when I saw it for the first time, I was just completely blown away. It's so beautiful. The bosses, there is so much variety. I think we touched on this before, that like they're not just like cookie cutter bosses at all. Like they have insane transformations. Every boss has a unique.
Nothing looks calculated.
Yeah.
Everything looks very organic. And I think that's like such a strong point. When I saw this, I was saying earlier that I had seen this at like a PlayStation or maybe E3 event. And when I watched that coverage of this game, my jaw dropped. And I was in awe. I was like, oh my God, this is my Saturday morning cartoon thing. I mean, I grew up watching a lot of the Merry Melodies and stuff, and a lot of the older stuff I loved. I always thought it was so silly and so goofy how their arms would wave around.
Yeah, it was so bouncy and rubbery, and this game definitely has all of that. And even in those cartoons, there was just crazy weird stuff that would go on.
It was so twisted and bizarre.
Yeah, and this game has all of that as well. So many great themes that are jam-packed all together. So many amazing characters. Like every boss, like you could fall in love with that boss with their transformations and the theme and the backgrounds and the color. One thing that I also want to point out is the overworld that you kind of walk around between the boss fights. It is kind of like RPG-like. But
maybe like Super Mario World or something kind of, like that in that sense.
Yeah, you can kind of walk to different bosses. You can bypass some of them. And but it has this old painting feel that reminded me so much of like Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, I can see that.
And just so that there had its own kind of like, it felt like the background of those old animations that were super, well painted. Right. And then the characters have more outlines to them. So you see, little Cuphead walking around from like a top down perspective. And it was just, every aspect of this game is so beautiful.
I like that the artwork is kind of like a little bit washed out. It's not, the contrast is not too high. It feels like it's a little bit more dull, and that makes it look like it's on like old film. Like,
right. And there's a lot of like imperfections in between the levels. On the screen, like little hairs and things like that, which is very cool. It adds all that aspect to it. The other thing that's kind of neat about this game is you have that health meter that we talked about, and you can collect the power-ups, but it's so tiny. It's just in the bottom corner, and it just says, HP.2, and then there's like little cards.
.1 or
and so it like it doesn't get in the way of the gameplay at all. It's really cool.
Right. They wanted to keep all that crap off the screen so that you could really focus on the animation, and like, man.
Yeah. It felt like a game it felt like a
cartoon.
Yeah. It felt like a cartoon instead of a game.
Right. And like, again, the way the fingers move feels like old timey. I don't know how to describe it, but they must have studied, like meticulously studied each frame of animation in a lot of these old cartoons to get down or to capture what that feeling was and what made them look that way. Like their smiles, the way that their eyes kind of glaze over, and then
like the eyelids are real shiny.
Right.
I remember that in like like old Daffy Duck type cartoons and stuff like that. It was really neat. And I remember reading that the two brothers were always really inspired by those old cartoons. They grew up with them, and I remember reading that they were gifted like a box set of these old cartoons, and they loved watching them. But an interesting fact about the main character Cuphead's visual inspiration, it actually came from a 1936 Japanese propaganda animation film where a guy with a teacup for a head transformed into a tank. So you can really see the correlation there. But this wasn't like a real quick one and done type thing.
Like an aha moment.
Yeah, like they went through 150 different designs.
No kidding.
And I mean, I'm sure some of those different designs were kind of bled into bosses and other amazing characters that appear in this game. But you could see that not only did they put a lot of attention into getting the animation to look authentic, but they wanted the characters to feel as well designed and lovable as possible.
Right. Chad had experience as a graphic designer and would hand paint the backgrounds and did hand draw animations for the game that were later kind of given life in Photoshop. They didn't have Photoshop in the 30s, but I think that old style is pretty much retained. I mean, that's what they did, right?
Yeah, and you can see a lot of the pencil tests for the animations on the company's Twitter page, which is really cool. The game has been blown up, and I've been seeing people retweet all this stuff all over the place, and it's just so awesome to watch, this raw, unfinished animations and see how they work and see like different tests and stuff like that.
Because there's like this element of human imperfection that's not present in modern day animation. You look at something like Simpsons or Futurama or whatever the kids are watching nowadays, and I don't know, but I mean, those are very much done with like Flash type programs.
Right. It's very clean. All the lines are like, there's very solid line weights and stuff like that. Whereas like these, I mean, you watch it and the animation doesn't quite line up sometimes. But that's what makes it so great and feel like those early cartoons where these animators were, figuring out how it all worked. Even
on a still frame, it looks like it's kind of breathing.
Right.
It has this kind of like you're almost looking at somebody with a flip book and you're watching like as, they're playing the game through a flip book. Anyways, it's awesome.
Yeah, and I think this game still would have been a lot of fun in like a pixel art type look to give it that, that game retro feel. But pixel art is so mechanical and it's, everything is so rigid and square.
It's like a mathematical kind of art style.
Right, yeah. So all those human imperfections would have been missing that would have made these characters feel so lively.
Right. It's like you're playing a cartoon.
Yeah, exactly.
Simply put. Anyways. Let's get into one more track, and then we'll talk to Mr. Kristofer Maddigan about his composition for Cuphead. So this track is called The King's Court, and you guys are absolutely going to love it. Oh man, what a ride, huh? That was the King's Court from Cuphead. And joining us to talk about the music of Cuphead is composer Kristofer Maddigan. Welcome, and thanks for coming on to chat with us. It's great to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, so why don't you tell us about your background?
So I started, like when I was very young, I wanted to be, well, my mom, like typical, a lot of young kids, like I put into piano when I was maybe like 6 or 7, and I really didn't like it.
Sounds like me.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I was better at it now, but so I really wanted to play rock drums. That was what I wanted to do. I was a big Billy Joel fan when I was a kid.
Nice.
Maybe a little square now, but it was a really killer concert. Actually, I think it was maybe like the first concert they did in Russia, like after the fall of the wall or something, like first American artist. Anyways, it's Billy Joel live in Leningrad.
Oh, awesome!
And
okay.
we had that on VHS. It's actually a really good show. And I just I just wanted to be Liberty DeVito, who was Billy Joel's drummer.
Oh,
and so like that was always, because he's just, you watch that guy, he just looked like he's having a blast, and he's just pounding, right? And so I mean, that's when I was like 9 and 10. That seemed really cool. So my mom kind of compromised, and she was like, okay, well, we'll take like legit percussion. We'll enroll you in legit percussion lessons. So that was kind of the trade-off.
About how old were you at that time?
I think I was 10.
Okay.
And but I still also played drum set on my own time. Like that was something that that's parents out there, let your kids play something that they really want to play, because like I really I practiced drum set all the time because I loved it. So that was I think that's a good rule of thumb. But yeah, so I did that, and I played percussion in band throughout high school, and played in rock bands and stuff. And then I think this is kind of a typical route for a lot of people who become percussionists. Like either a lot of them start on straight percussion when they're a kid, like just regular legit percussion, or they come over from a rock drum set background, which is actually quite common, I think.
Oh, cool.
And so I ended up doing my undergrad in classical percussion and orchestral stuff, and sort of from there I just ended up became a freelancer in the percussion scene, and I still try to play as much jazz as possible because I love it.
Right.
But so that's essentially my background, and my composition background is very minimal before this project. And basically the only reason I sort of got involved was because Chad and Jared, who are the founders of StudioMDHR, I've been friends with them for like 25 years, basically. I think I met Chad in grade 5, maybe. Or something. So,
wow. Yeah. We were curious as to how you got hooked up with Cuphead and StudioMDHR.
That was our next question, actually.
Yeah, if they were an established studio, they never would have hired me. It was kind of like it's a friends thing. And they had asked me, well, they said, we're going to make this, originally Cuphead was a lot smaller, 4 or 5 years ago. And they were like, do you want to write music for this little thing we're doing? And my recollection of it is that I said no a couple times initially, because I was like, I don't know how to. I love big band music. I play jazz and stuff, but I've never written any big band music. And so they kind of persisted, and then I just ended up doing it, and sort of started working on, you kind of take these baby steps, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so ended up doing a lot of listening and studying, and wrote some MIDI stuff, and found a really good teacher, and just kind of we sort of bounce these ideas back and forth. I would send stuff to Chad, and he would say, this is great, or this needs to be faster, or this is not going to fit anywhere. And then, 4 years later, you have a 3-hour soundtrack to the game.
Incredible.
But,
we were kind of poking around your resume, actually, and it's pretty impressive. I mean,
yeah.
You've been a member of the National Ballet of Canada Orchestra for the last 7 years. Performances with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, Street Silver Band. I mean, there's this enormous list of stuff that you've done. So I wouldn't say your compositional history is that small. I mean, you have a lot of experience, so it's pretty awesome.
I'd like to think that if as a working, I guess I'm a professional musician, would be my title.
I guess so.
I think so. I hesitate to call myself that, but that's what I do. But there's sort of a point where it's hopefully when you're in that position, if you sit down to write something, you have enough sort of background and common sense to be able to say this is good, or this is not good. Let's figure out why it's not good.
Right.
You know, like there's still like definitely like my musical background informs making some informed decisions, I think, as a composer for sure.
Well, so, this whole soundtrack, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, maybe we can get into a little more detail. The whole soundtrack is like a mashup of big band. There's like a vaudeville kind of feeling to it, jazz, even, I want to kind of even say some Dixie. Yeah.
Some ragtime stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So what were your thoughts going into the project? What was your approach to tackle something like this?
Well, Chad had a very clear definition off the start, or a sort of clear idea of what he wanted sound-wise. So I kind of already had a bit of a roadmap laid out. Initially, it was just going to be bosses, and there wasn't really going to be, I don't remember if there was going to be an overworld hub or anything at all, but, he did some research sort of before talking to me, and he sent me these tracks, sent me some Cap Calloway stuff that he liked, and I think obviously probably he sent me Sing 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 because that's a pretty standard, but it's, a very, exciting up-tempo kind of track, right?
Right. James was saying earlier that some of the tracks sounded like the Chips Ahoy commercial, and I was like, oh, James, come on.
Well, that's what I grew up with.
Is that Sing Sing Sing?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, definitely like that band, the Benny Goodman band with Rupa on drums and then Lionel Hampton on vods, you hear a lot of that actually on the soundtrack for sure.
Right.
But Chad sent me a bunch of stuff, and he's like, this is the direction that the game should go. It needs to be 30s big band. It needs to be almost uncomfortably fast a lot of the time and sort of exciting. So it was easy enough to get started because he sort of had a strong direction.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we started to add other things, there became like the overworld map, and there sort of became these like secondary things like Elder Kettle and some of the other ideas in the game. I kind of wanted to differentiate that in a way. So at that point we were like, well, let's use the ragtime style.
Right.
And maybe just to sort of, which is maybe a little anachronistic. That's definitely, a few decades before Cuphead is set that was trendy, but the Sting did it, and the Sting was a big hit. So, so we thought that was okay. Yeah. And there was something, we tried some things too that just didn't work. Like I tried to write a couple of Count Basie style tracks, and they just didn't fit really with anything in the game. And that's obviously great music and super exciting and fun, but like stylistically, it didn't really seem to work, I think. And Chad also had bouncing ideas off of him really great, because I would send him things, and he would be able. He has, he had the whole thing in his head, whether or not anything was finished or not. That he knew what things needed to be and what they need to look like and what they need to sound like. And you could tell when I sent him something like, this is not going to work anywhere, or this is going to work, this will work for this one area. And then he would let me know that, and then I would try and refine it a bit more for like certain bosses are definitely, you can tell the music is written specifically for that boss.
Totally.
The train is like that. There's a few in there that are the frogs one.
Oh, well, we'll get into that.
Specific, yeah. Other ones, I was just kind of writing stuff, and then we'd match it up
to what the feeling of that area is.
Through the process. Yeah.
Right. Cool. So that track we just listened to, The King's Court, really action-packed. This amazing big band feel, but like it just pounds on you. This is so lively, so energetic. It's a perfect track for this game.
Oh yeah, and I think this is definitely one of the tracks that if you only had a couple to show people, this is probably a good track to kind of give people an idea of the kind of big sound and the different take that this video game is taking.
Very explosive, very energetic, and it's very Cuphead in every iteration, every way you can imagine it. Kristofer, tell us about the King's Court.
Well, I mean, that's the King Dice melody. That's what it's a variation of King Dice's theme, which is a very early tune that got written. If you go back to literally, I think, the very first trailer, like before that E3 trailer that got really big, you'll hear a variation of King Dice in there. So that's a pretty old tune. Awesome. And we, when Chad was like, okay, there's going to be this casino near the end of the game, and you're going to fight, it needs to have the King Dice tune, and then needs to have sort of this like just the drums vibe to keep it. I think it's when you're like flipping the dice. There's no actual music. There's just like the Gene Krupa style drum thing.
Right.
and then it needs to have its own variation when you actually fight King Dice himself. So that was always, we sort of knew that one in particular needed to hit really hard. So,
well,
I
think you nailed it.
Well, and
that one actually, it's one of my more favorite tracks for sure.
Well, and to me, the King Dice, the entire section of him is one of the more unique and amazing points in this game. I mean, and not only is it near the climax, but it's such a unique take on a series of boss fights.
Yeah, I just finally played that. I think I beat the game like a week ago.
Oh wow!
So,
great.
So I haven't, I got to play some demo stuff earlier on, but never had the full game until it was actually. I think we got it like seriously the day before September 20th. Well, we got it the day before it came out. So, so we, a lot of us on the team were kind of experiencing it with everybody else in the world, whoever was playing it.
It's kind of interesting to be working so hard on this project and to get to see the final thing the day before everyone else does.
just the day before.
Yeah,
I know.
It's kind of interesting.
Well, yeah, and I didn't have much time either, so people who saw a lot more than I did by the end of the next day.
Right.
So
awesome. Well, hey, why don't we get into another track and we'll get your thoughts on it. This is called Floral Fury, composed by Kristofer Maddigan.
You just heard Floral Fury, composed by Kristofer Maddigan for Cuphead.
I love this track so much. It's got, it reminds me of the, is it the Peanut Vendor, I want to say?
Oh, I don't know.
It's got this kind of Latin feel to it. I love it. This is an incredible track, and it just gets me in this like kind of salsa mood, I guess. Yeah.
Well, and for me, this track stands out compared to some of the previous ones that we've played that we kind of talked about having this kind of like old bar, maybe like a classier bar and more of a like rough and brawling type bar.
Right.
Whereas this kind of feels like you go outdoors. Like I think that Latin
like you're on the
feel
streets
gives it gives it a little bit more of an organic, like outdoorsy
kind
feel.
of lively, almost like in some small town, like everybody's hanging out, drinking out of a coconut or something. So Kristofer, tell us a little bit about Floral Fury.
Sure. I mean, that's a very intuitive observation about being outside. I'll get to that in a second. But so this tune is this, along with the King Dice, like his tune that he sings, Die House.
Oh, right.
Seem to be the two most popular tunes from the game.
Oh, no kidding.
I'm kind of trying to be fairly present on social media and whatnot. People seem to really like this one a lot, and it is quite exciting, yeah. And basically, this one came about because so I play in a samba group in Toronto.
Nice.
And I've done that for maybe 3 years now.
Nice.
And the leader of the group is a good friend of mine and an incredible percussionist, Alan Hetherington. And he's kind of like a genius with Brazilian music. Like it's kind of his thing, basically. And he's studied it for like decades. And but anyways, he took about a year and a half ago. He took a group of us down to Brazil to go to Carnival.
Oh wow!
Which was like awesome. And he didn't know. I didn't really like make a big stink over like I'm writing this music for this game. So not everyone really knew that I was working on this.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, I was half done Pyramid Peril. That was like the most recent tune I'd been working on. So there was also kind of another more more Latin-y, quote unquote, kind of tune that was in my mind.
Right.
But so we were down in Brazil, and we just ended up chatting one night, and I was telling him about this game project I was working on. And he's like, "Oh, that sounds really cool." And so I showed him the E3 trailer, and he was like, "Man, you've got to write me something that I can play on this on this game." So it kind of got the cogs turning, and so we kind of ended up chatting like about period era Brazilian tunes, and like he had some suggestions of guys to go listen to, like Mario Reyes and a few others, like Ari Barroso, I believe, from that era as well. But I ended up listening to a ton of Carmen Miranda stuff. And because she was in the 30s and 40s, a big deal. And her music is really, like, I know she kind of seems like a parody, like in like North American culture. She's she's the girl with the tutti frutti hat, like that's her. That's her persona, right? But she was legitimately a fantastic performer and singer, and I don't know how much of the music she wrote herself, but she always had great tunes. And when we were down in Brazil, also we went to Carnival. We went to one of the parades in Sao Paulo, and then we went to one of the parades in Rio.
Mm-hmm.
And they were awesome.
Yeah, it must have been an amazing experience.
It was wild. We're hoping to go back again this coming season, but it's a total blast. It's a beautiful country. So this kind of grew out of that. Like I wanted to do this sort of hyped up Carmen Miranda tune, but also with this carnival kind of vibe, which would be where you're like, I'm glad that comes across. That it's maybe more of like a street party kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the what we were going for. So that's why in the back half of the tune there's that big percussion breakdown, because I was like, let's do something that's just this percussion carnival kind of groove thing, right?
I was going to ask too, you've been with the National Ballet of Canada for the last 7 years,
mm-hmm.
and since 2015 acting is the primary percussion. So given this track, I want to know what was the important for it in this piece, because it definitely drives the song.
Yeah, I didn't play any of the I played actually a lot of the percussion on the soundtrack, but I didn't play any of the percussion on this track. I left that all to Alan, because he's the specialist. I kind of knew what I wanted it to sound like, but I just let him kind of have free range when we went into the studio. So the tune, the big band had already recorded their parts, and we had laid down a scratch sort of drum track for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was just like, Alan, just do your thing. And,
that's awesome. It worked out well.
Everything he did was super exciting, and it comes across. Yeah, I think it just comes across really well. And you hear a little snippet of him too in the first in Admission to Perdition, which is the first form of the last boss tune.
Oh, that's him playing as well.
Yeah, he comes back for a few bars in that one as well.
Awesome.
That's
and
cool.
I knew in this tune I really wanted that squeaky sound you hear off the top of the tune, and then throughout the percussion breakdown. That's called the cuica, and it's
explain this to us.
So it's a Brazilian. It's called a friction drum basically, and it's a small drum which has only one head, and through the middle of that head there's a wooden dowel that's sort of jammed through the head basically. And what you do is you take sort of a wet rag or sponge and you rub it on the dowel on the inside, and the friction of that makes the drum make that sound. And then you can change the pitches by using your other hand and pressing sort of in and out on the head itself.
That's wild.
I think I've actually even seen this before.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, that was one of my stipulations. I was like, Alan, you gotta brush out your cuica chops.
That's awesome.
So.
Well, it's so great too that this was one of your friends and they wanted to be involved, and this track has become so big. Like you were saying, this is it seems like one of the more favorite tracks that people have gravitated towards.
Right.
Yeah, and it's nice. Everyone involved, it's like any sort of collaboration. Like anything that I wrote down is only sort of a small part of what ends up happening. Like it's the personality that everyone brings to all of the playing. Like if you had just heard MIDI charts of a lot of these things, it would have sounded, other than it sounding like MIDI, it would have had no life.
Right.
It's so important to get people who are obviously great players, but also who are, you want on the project and who are interested in being on the project.
Right.
And what they bring with their personality and their suggestions and everything else, so much of this wouldn't have sounded like anything.
It wouldn't have been the same.
All of it.
Right.
Yeah. So, on that particular track, Alan deserves a lot of the credit for how killer it sounds.
Well, if you're listening to this, Alan, our hats are off to you, sir.
Yes, thank you.
I'll make sure he gets
some recognition.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I mean, that last track was so good. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on the next track. So let's play the next track, which is Clip Joint Calamity, and we'll be right back.
Excellent.
All right, that was Clip Joint Calamity, composed by Kristofer Maddigan for Cuphead.
This is another great one. I like that this one feels a little bit different to me. It's a little less aggressive, but still not safe. But it still sounds very fun to me, and that gives me this sense of like you're doing something you maybe aren't supposed to, but that's what kind of makes it so fun.
This reminds me of, I don't know, I get this feeling like I'm fighting a bunch of boxing frogs. No, I'm just kidding. No, this track, though, is really great. These, again, we've talked about it before earlier on in the show. The horn section is incredible. Mm-hmm. Where did you get these guys? Like, tell us about this band that performed this music.
Yeah, so there's basically two large ensembles that are on the soundtrack. There's the ragtime band and then the big band. Mm-hmm. And so you have the ragtime band who did the things like Elder Kettle, Inkwell Island 1, 2, and 4, some of the other ones like that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The Winner Takes All, I believe. And that was a group where I knew the music wasn't going to be... None of the music is particularly easy, but that one wasn't so challenging that we needed a pre-formed kind of group that has a certain amount of... like, if you're like... The thing about music is that if you don't have... I'm just trying to think about the best way to put this here.
Chops?
Like, no, it's like a lot of... You can put together a symphony orchestra, you can put together a jazz band with just freelance players, mm-hmm. and they'll probably, kill the gig. But there's a certain synergy and experience and sort of understanding the way everyone around you plays that only comes with, a lot of experience playing with each other.
Right.
And so for the ragtime stuff, I knew that we didn't really need to have that. So I really, booked, the people I wanted on those sessions were people who were friends of mine. And I was like, I want you on this project. Mm-hmm. Whereas the big band, we knew that we needed a group of players who were familiar with each other.
Yeah, they had chemistry.
Yeah, chemistry. That's literally the word I've been looking for months, talking about this. That's super important, I think, for something like this, especially in the sense of, this is still fundamentally funded by a small studio, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So you can't go in there and be wasting studio time. It's damn expensive.
They need to do it once, and they need to do it right.
Yeah, and you could get that with freelance players, but I don't think there would be you'd be missing a cohesiveness maybe mm-hmm. to the final product, and it might be a minor thing, but for this, as soon as we decided, I think very initially for a few moments we were because this was going to be a super small budget game, so. It was we'll have to use MIDI, and then I'll lay down some drums. Or we can hire a real rhythm section to play along with it, maybe, and have somebody take some solos,
right?
Fill it out. But we're not going to be able to afford a big band. And then when it kind of got a lot bigger, there was this okay, well, we need to have a full big band. And from very early after that point, I was always really sure that I wanted to hire this group called the Boss Brass. And it's not so in Canada. There's arguably the most important Canadian big band that's ever existed would be the Boss Brass. And they don't... Rob McConnell, who's the leader of the Boss Brass, passed away, I think, maybe 10 years ago. The band has been sort of more or less defunct, I want to say, since around 2000. Okay. They had been around for over 30 years. Mm-hmm. And the majority of the players that are on those sessions have played together in the Boss Brass for decades.
I see.
That was kind of, we knew that we needed to get people with that experience. And I was just well, why don't we hire Canada's best big band, essentially, and sort of put them back together in that sense.
Ooh, man, that's bold.
Well, and they're all, too.
The band was together for a long time. A lot of them have passed on. But there's a lot of the players that still are playing around town, and they all live in Toronto, more or less. So it was easy to sort of get them.
No, let's get it worked out.
And aside from the knowledge and the chops that they brought to the experience, you could tell that they were hard tunes, but I think you could tell that they were having a good time, and it was, they were catching up. And
I think one of the first things that we said in the beginning of the show is it sounds like these guys are having a blast. Mm-hmm. And you could hear it, and just the way that they work together. I mean, even the solos, they know how to play off of each other. It's almost like a very coordinated, synchronized swimming thing. Everything just sounds like they don't even blink an eye. They just know who's going to play next and where everything lines up. And so I think that's the beauty of the soundtrack.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the experience that they have playing together, and that is a super important thing. Like when you hear an orchestra playing a piece that they've done together dozens of times, whereas you hear a pickup orchestra of equally talented players doing the same piece, it's not going to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be missing sort of something there. And it's the same. Big band it's a smaller group too, so it's maybe even more important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you got the right guys to do the job.
We were listening, I think I was freaking out when we had the very first rehearsal.
Uh-huh.
We had one rehearsal for the first set of sessions and one rehearsal for the second set. And we basically ran the hardest parts, and that was it. It was pretty minimal. So they're incredible sight readers. But I just remember, that first session, I was just like, this could be terrible. these things might not be playable. Maybe they all printed off in the wrong keys, and we're just totally screwed. And as soon as they played the first tune, it was like, wow, this is going to be awesome.
This is going to be awesome.
So that was, it was pretty exciting. Still very nerve wracking, but.
It worked out, so that's good.
Yeah, and I mean, you've mentioned a few things that like you said that you kind of turned them down a couple times to work on this project, and like you just mentioned some very anxiety-ridden moments leading up to making the music. Were there any other really big challenges for making the music for this game?
It was a lot of work. I mean, essentially, the challenge was just putting in the time consistently, I think, to do the research and come up with things that, there was always this looming deadline that was kind of always years off.
Right.
And then finally, when we booked the first set of recording sessions, and you sort of book around when the studio is available too. I think we needed 3 days for the first set of sessions. I think we were in there for maybe 6 days total with the big band, and then a couple days with the ragtime groups. But you sort of need to book it in a bit of a chunk. So when we booked that first one, it was like, well, here's the only time that we have 3 days in a row available, when all of the players that we want are also available.
Mm-hmm.
So then as soon as it became this set in stone deadline, that's kind of when, because I think a lot of projects, nothing was actually totally finished at that point.
Mm-hmm.
You keep, and it's nice to have a final deadline at some point, because you actually end up finishing things and not going back and just
trying to redo it over and over.
Yeah, and that's what happened with a lot of the charts. And then as soon as we had that deadline, it was like, well, it needs to be done, and it's going to be sort of what it is. So it's good to have that. So the challenge of just always knowing that it was going to need to get done, and then when we booked the actual dates, then
it's real.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and I think that that helps keep something from being too overworked, and it allows some of that human imperfection that it seems like this game kind of went for a little bit with the old animations and all the little imperfections.
Yeah, everything.
I think that it allowed it to feel not so over polished and still kind of lively.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the music is great because it's not perfect. Everyone played excellently. There are still parts which are not, electronically MIDI tight, and that's great. That's what makes it better in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I listen to it now, and these tunes for me aren't necessarily particularly old, but now I listen to it, and there's tons of stuff that I was that I would think now I wouldn't write it that way.
Yeah.
So you can still you can fiddle with something forever, but you're never going to actually finish it.
Right, and you continue to grow and become influenced in different ways. So you may think that
at the time
I would do it differently now, but back then you didn't have those inspirations. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a few more tracks while we have you on with us. Why don't we play this one? It's called Sugarland Shimmy, and we'll be right back.
You just heard Sugarland Shimmy, composed by Kristofer Maddigan for Cuphead.
There's something about the composition or the way it was performed that I really like. It sounds like the drums are, the percussion line is setting this pace that is almost unachievable by the rest of the band, and they're trying to catch up. It's almost like this game of cat and mouse, like a Tom and Jerry cartoon, and I really like that about it. It's almost like a race to see who can come out on top, and the band is always just trying to catch up and get there, and that gives it this really alive, fun, frantic, old school vibe. I love it. I love this track. It's really good.
Yeah, and for me, this one also brings up some different imagery than some of the previous tracks that we've talked about. Like, we've talked about tracks that kind of feel like grungy, like dangerous bars and more classy bars and being like outside and things like that. But this one feels like a big club, like something that's very flashy, lots of lights.
Like you should be wearing a zoot suit right now.
Yeah, something like that. And lots of people dancing all together, like, little couples, but everyone knows the same dance.
They're all doing the same routine.
Yeah, kind of thing. So like this big performance, and so it feels very like high end and classy. Whereas some of the other tracks that we've listened to kind of feel dangerous and kind of
almost like
seedy.
a small like jazz bar or like some kind of like lounge.
Right, and this is like the big center of town type thing.
Right. So Kristofer, tell us about Sugarland Shimmy.
So this was one of the tunes that was not written specifically for this boss. I was sort of half done it, and at some point Chad said, "This is going to match up with this,"
Okay.
And then showed me some pictures of what was going on, and then sort of went from there. And this has been, I think, reasonably obviously influenced by Benny Goodman with Gene Krupa doing the Gene Krupa Tom Tom thing.
Oh yeah.
Lionel Hampton on the vibe. Like, I really like that clarinet and vibraphone. The sound of them playing together. So I use that a few times on the soundtrack. And this one came about really, I don't know if it's specifically inspired by any particular tune or anything. It just came about really organically. The form is actually very, very odd. It's kind of got this like minute-long introduction, which is kind of strange, with I think the hardest trombone line in the whole 3 hours. I realized I think I had meant to put it maybe in tenor sax or bari sax, and it was one of those things I didn't get around to doing. And then I remember Al Kay, who is the trombone player, who's a Canadian legend.
Oh man, I was gonna say that we need to give that guy we need to send him like a 6-pack of beer or something. This guy rocked. Oh yeah,
he's and I remember he looked at it and he's like, okay. And it really shouldn't have been in the trombone, but it sounded, sort of, it's totally slayed the part. But yeah, so it's got a minute-long introduction, and then it's blues form for a bit. But then it goes into like this rhythm changes kind of bridge, and then the form totally changes, and the tune changes, and never really comes back in the same way. And it's very abnormal, I think, in terms of structure. But it's kind of one of the tunes where I was not so worried about, letting it sort of evolve as I felt like it should, and just sort of letting it happen.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where, this is arguably one of the odder tunes, I think, on the whole soundtrack, but it's still really exciting. And I think a lot of these, like what you were kind of saying earlier about how everything is, or a lot of the stuff on the soundtrack sounds exciting, but still like there's this underlying sort of maybe seediness or tension to a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
And like none of the boss music anyways is in a major key. It's all in a minor key. But then it's still it's kind of got these, angular, quirky, sort of not really traditional sounding lines in them, which I think is what makes it ends up working really well as video game music. But also, play it pretty fast, it's exciting. But the fact that it's all in a minor key is this kind of weird juxtaposition of feelings and vibes. So, and that was not necessarily putting everything in a minor key was kind of intentional, because we wanted everything to be. I think Chad initially wanted things to be even a bit darker, but it never really worked out that way.
Interesting.
Yeah, because a lot of the tunes, most of the boss tunes, some of the stuff, there's some dark stuff with the devil and maybe near the end of the game, but like a lot of the tunes are, despite their content, they're actually kind of like fun.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. They're very energetic and fun.
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to mention, you kind of touched on a little bit about how this is video game music, and it's a little bit of a different medium. And you were saying how the Sugarland Shimmy kind of evolves and never really comes back to where it starts, right. Which for this game specifically seems to work out perfectly, just because the fact that bosses change and evolve and their patterns get different, and some like change form completely, which I think is kind of a neat aspect for the music to kind of mirror that and some of the fights.
Mm-hmm. We weren't really able to approach this in the way that traditional games music might be approached. Like, we sort of realized that after the fact that all of the music is twice as long as it needs to be, essentially, because like in the game you
never get that far.
You never get that far, or if you do get that far, you're good enough that you've already almost beat the boss.
Right.
So unless you're like purposely hanging around to hear the music and just sort of jumping out of the way of things, it's
well, I'm sure there's people that are actually doing that too.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully they just pick up the soundtrack.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we go ahead and get into our last track with you? This one is called Murine Corps, and we'll be right back.
just heard Murine Corps, composed by Kristofer Maddigan for Cuphead.
I've said this a million times, but I love this track. It's like each one is so unique. It has its own flair to it. This one, I think what I like about it is it completely changes pace. It has this it's almost like a double time feel, but not really. And it has this just completely different vibe just all of a sudden. And you just get to watch the track evolve as it progresses. It's a longer track. It's 4 minutes, but it just keeps going through these other iterations. I love that about it.
Yeah, and I mean, to kind of add on to you know us keep saying that we love all these tracks. This is, you know, for us that are really into game music, like we hear a lot of chiptune type stuff, and to hear something that's so wildly different and it's still game related is great. Like I remember we were both very excited about doing Grim Fandango and stuff like that, which has a kind of a similar swingy, jazzy feel, which is great. This track is another one that's kind of different than some of the songs we've played previously, where it starts out kind of soft, or not softer, but not as intense, and then it has these little flare-ups, and then it just keeps growing and gets bigger and goes through these different transitions, like you were saying, and it feels so different than the other tracks. Like it has a lot of, you know, similar instruments and stuff like that, but
it has its own personality.
But yeah, like each track feels like, you know, like you said, its own personality.
Right. Kristofer, tell us about Murine Corps.
So yeah, I mean, when I was doing the research for this, like I listened to literally thousands and thousands of tunes from that era to just try and sort of get different ideas, but also, you know, I didn't want everything to sound totally the same if possible. So this one in particular, there's a really famous Lindy Hop scene from a film called Hell's a Poppin'.
Okay.
And it's like it's kind of, I haven't watched the film yet, and I've been meaning to for a long time, and I should watch it. I think it's like a slapstick comedy basically from the 30s. But there's this dance troupe in it called Whitey's Lindy Hoppers. And anyone who hasn't checked out this scene has to watch. Go on YouTube right now. It's only like a few minutes long. It's the most incredible dance scene that's maybe ever been filmed.
We'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the tune that plays behind it, I haven't been able to figure out what song it is or who recorded it. I think, unfortunately, a lot of stuff from that era, too, you know, the musicians on film soundtracks didn't really get credit.
Mm-hmm.
So, just wasn't documented.
This long dance sequence that's kind of just this, like, riff-based thing. And the riff kind of like, you know, you'll have the verse, so to speak, and then the chorus, and it kind of goes back and forth. And the riff always comes back, but it's you know, transposed. It's in a different instrument, slightly different. The key maybe changes. And so I kind of wanted to try writing something like that. And this is also a kind of different form than a lot of the other tunes. There's no really big open solo sections. There's the one piano solo in it. I think that's pretty well it. And I just want, like, it was just the idea of trying to keep this, like, riff just kind of, like, going and sort of hammering away through the whole tune. And that's kind of where this idea basically came from, that watching that video, you know, a few hundred times, because it's really killer track. The Hell's a Poppin' tune.
Yeah, we'll have to watch that clip. I haven't seen it yet, so
yeah, it's really worth checking out. But speaking to what you were talking about earlier too, like we tried to, in terms of this being, the soundtrack being like fairly different than a lot of video game soundtracks. Like, we really wanted it to seem like a video game, but it still seemed like it was from that era. And I really sort of found that my general approach was not like I'm somebody in the 2000s writing 30s big band music for an 80s style game, right? Like I really was thinking, what if in some different universe there's a 1930s jazz age happening, and also video games have already been invented? What would those tunes sound like?
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of where we were coming from with this. And part of that idea was also we hit on the idea that we shouldn't make it super loop based. We should maybe, like, honestly write complete songs.
Right.
And, you know, so many video game soundtracks. There's, like, obviously incredible soundtracks and incredible composers working in games, but, you know, the majority, if not, you know, almost all of the major video game soundtracks, it's, you know, you'll have an introduction to the tune, and then you'll have the tune, and it'll repeat a few times, and it'll just fade out because it's just meant to loop within the game.
Right.
And my kind of theory was why write 95% of a song and then just fade it out at the end. So
give it a distinct ending.
Yeah, and you can't hear those ends at least in the big band, the boss tunes. Like, it's not set up. You literally actually can't hear them in the tune, because if you just sit on the boss, it will loop back to earlier in the tune, but you never actually hear the end of the song itself.
Right.
So it was kind of like, we were like, if we're going to make a soundtrack out of this, it should actually be like a legitimate album that someone can sit down and listen to. Like it's an actual album.
And it's like the difference between listening to the music in the game and getting the soundtrack, to where there's a slightly different experience so that you can actually hear that the amazing endings to some of these songs.
Well, I could put this album on for anybody and no one would ever guess this is a video game soundtrack. No one would ever guess. If I play this for my mom and she'd just be like, that's an awesome soundtrack, where can I buy it? I'd be like, Mom, it's a video game. She'd be like, this is an awesome soundtrack, where can I buy it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that means that we, hopefully succeeded in what we were doing. And we also did, it's interesting, we were trying to figure out ways, like, what can we do if the tune needs to loop? Or, to keep things interesting. Mm-hmm. And so the majority of the solos, typically you'll hear on a typical big band form. Murine Corps does not count on this one because it's kind of an odd one, but you'll hear like an introduction, then you'll hear the ensemble section, and then somebody will take solo, and then you'll hear another like a bridge section, and then there'll be another solo, and then maybe like the outro or something. And most of the solos we didn't do live off the floor. We had the band play, and no one was soloing at all, and we brought in players afterwards to do solos.
Oh, that's cool.
So most of the tunes have different. There's multiple takes. So some of the tunes have, I believe, 5 or 6 different versions in the game, and it's super subtle, and which also I think is great that it hasn't really been super noticed, because that means it's like maybe sort of doing its job. Mm-hmm. But you'll play one boss one time, and you might get a piano solo, and then it's followed by a saxophone solo. And then if you die and play it again, you'll have the same song, but you might have a trumpet solo and then a vibraphone solo after.
That's really cool. I did not notice that. That's really awesome. I haven't gotten that far into the game, so maybe that's why.
It's pretty subtle, yeah. But we were also trying to figure out, like, what's the way we can still make this not boring.
Right.
And because we can't, I think there's the games that sort of, they'll layer things on as things get more exciting. And they can do that because it's electronic or MIDI based somehow. And the way we were recording, we weren't really able to think that way. So it made more sense, like, what can we do to, maybe not so much in a vertical sense, but in a horizontal sense, but in like a vertical sense, how can we make things more interesting over a period of time?
Right. It's funny. It's like the music almost has its different RNG patterns, like the bosses do. Like next time you fight the boss, they may give you a little bit of a different pattern, and you may actually have a little bit of a different song.
Yeah.
Awesome. I never thought of it that way, but yeah, it's a similar approach. Yeah.
All right. So, this is the only game that you've composed music for. Could you see yourself doing or being involved in more game audio in the future?
I think the project would have to be right. Like, this was a very, it's a personal approach. It was a lot of work. And like, I'm busy enough. Like, I freelance in the city, and I had to set aside 3 or 4 hours a day for 3 or 4 years to research and study and write. And that was, it was a huge commitment. And as Chad said about the game too, like, if they had known 6 or 7 years ago how much work it was going to be, they might not have made the game. And also, like, the same thing with the music is, like, originally this was a lot smaller of a project. If I'd known I would have written, if it added up to basically almost 3 hours of music a couple of years ago, I would have been like, no, hell no, way too much work.
Awesome.
So I enjoyed. It was never, like, the process was rewarding, and I'm really glad that it turned out the way it did, and I'm glad that I did it. But it was extremely laborious a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. I guess it's kind of like doing anything. Like, it was often frustrating, and then you'd have the occasional breakthrough moments are what make it worthwhile, or when you come up with something that's like, oh, this is great. So, for me to consider doing that again, I enjoyed it, and I would like to do more writing, but I think the projects would have to be
smaller scale, maybe. Or?
Not necessarily smaller scale, but they maybe couldn't be, like, I can't fathom the people who do writing for, like, films or TV, where you get this finished film a month before it's coming out. and it's like, okay, now we need music for this, or every week we need more music for a television.
Right,
like,
right.
I'm kind of a slow worker in that sense, but it also would be like, it would have to be a project that I would think is actually like super special.
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely work with StudioMDHR again, and I do have ideas stored up if they made a Cuphead 2, and I'm not saying that's happening. I don't want to go on record,
right?
Because that's you never know what the plans are. But if they did something else and they wanted me to write music for it, I would say most likely say yes. If they did a sequel to this, and if they asked me again, I would probably say yes to that too. But it would have to be for. I wouldn't necessarily want to do something as like commercial work for hire kind of thing. Like the projects, the people involved would have to be fun. Like it was easy to work with the studio because I've been friends with them for so long.
Yeah, that makes it a little bit easier. I can tell.
This was definitely it seems like a labor of love. It seemed like they were both all in, and I think that's one thing that makes it so much more special to see all the press and love for this game in such a short period of time, over all those years of work. And I mean, this game has exploded and has seen as much press as games that have hundreds of people working on them.
Yeah, it was on Conan O'Brien in like a few weeks ago or something like that. It's getting big.
Sometime in the summer, it was. And that was part, like I wanted to do. It's also, I think, if you're doing maybe like work for hire and stuff, if you're just kind of like hashing it out real quick and you don't really care about the project, you just care about the paycheck, then that sort of comes across. But I never did this for any, like the reason I wanted to do a good job was because I didn't want to disappoint my friends who asked me to do this thing. Right?
That's awesome.
And
awesome.
And then after the E3 thing really took off, it became a bit more stressful because it was like, oh, there's actually going to be a lot of people maybe playing this game.
This is real now.
Now I want to do a good job so I don't look like an idiot. But, you still have to do things because you want to do them, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
And not just as some sort of, it's just a gig or whatever.
Well, let's quickly talk about, we've had some awesome insight from you on the soundtrack. There's a few places you can buy it. So I Am 8-Bit released a 4 LP vinyl box set of Cuphead in like this vintage style packaging. It's like 3 hours of music, the whole soundtrack, which includes also the digital version. So you can pick that up. It's also available on Bandcamp, I believe. And
it is Bandcamp, and it's going to be, it should be out on iTunes any day.
Okay.
Yeah, I was actually expecting it out by now. But
last time I checked, it wasn't, but it could be. By the time this episode's out, in a few days, it should be on iTunes as well. And then also Steam. You can buy it directly on Steam for $10.
Yeah, you can buy it as the bundle with the game, so it all comes included.
Yep.
I think you need to buy on Steam, though, and maybe GOG, you might have to buy it as part of the game.
Okay, you might have to. I think you might be right. It might be a bundle together.
I'm not sure, yeah.
I actually think I might have seen it separately on Steam as like a separate, if you just wanted to pay the $10 or whatever for the soundtrack. I'm not,
that would be
not
good,
sure, but I thought I saw a couple different options where you could just buy the game in the bundle, or just the soundtrack.
Yeah. Anyways, there's a lot of places to buy it.
It is easily available if people want to.
Right.
And I know
there's a lot of places to buy it, and it's an incredible soundtrack, and it's very cheap. Well, Kristofer, thank you so much for being on the show, telling us all about the composition of Cuphead and your history, your past, and also the development cycle working on the soundtrack. It's so important to hear this, and we're so excited to be able to talk with you.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on here.
Is there any other plugs that you might have? Like, where can we find more information about you?
Well, my website. I gotta look it up here.
I'm gonna guess ChristoferMaddigan.com.
Just ChrisMaddigan.com.
Okay.
Oh.
Chris with a K. If you Google Cuphead Composer, I'm sure that will
it'll pop up.
And I am on Twitter, also maybe the same thing. I don't. I'm easily Googleable.
Googleable.
Yeah.
Love it. All right. Well, thank you so much. It's been an honor to have you on our show, and we really appreciate.
Hey, thank you. My pleasure.
Awesome. Oh man, that was great having him on to talk about his music and such a great soundtrack. And I think if I was an indie composer listening to this, I think it would have inspired me to, kind of take his route and his path and study hard and keep with it.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely get a sense that it was something a little overwhelming at first, but stuck with it, and it turned out great. I mean, and this game is very special. It's definitely a once-in-a-lifetime type game. It's so unique and different in every way. I think that's one of the reasons why so many people have gravitated towards it, and it's been received so well.
Yeah, I think in the first 2 weeks, they said it sold over 1 million copies.
Yeah.
Incredible. For it.
Pretty insane for us. Such a small
for two
studio.
guys. Yeah. I mean, website stuff gave it great reviews, like 9s, like high 8s. Even Metacritic is like 89. So it's looking pretty good across the board. I think the biggest complaint was what people said it was too hard.
Yeah, and I think that's just the modern gaming culture. I think people that are really into retro stuff, it felt retro because of that.
Oh yeah, I mean there's parts where I thought it was too easy. So
yeah, you're just gonna die and try again, and just don't give up. Yep. You know, it may take 80 tries, but you know, you just go again.
Yep. So today we covered Cuphead, currently on Steam, Windows 10, and Xbox One, composed by Kristofer Maddigan.
And if you want to know more about the show, you can find us on our website, pixelatedaudio.com, for show notes and track lists. We can also be found on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Pixelated Audio.
Yes, and if you want to leave us a review on iTunes, that's always appreciated. Want to give a big thanks to Norm, who left us a recent review on iTunes. He's a really nice guy, vocal in Discord. So Discord is something you should check out. You can chat with all of us there, post some tunes, listen to some music. That's always fun. A
link to Discord is on our website as well, so it's real easy to find.
Yeah, and as a bonus, StudioMDHR gave us a few Steam codes to give out to you guys. The first one we're going to give away to anybody who posts on the website for this, comments on the website for this episode. After a day or so, we'll pick a winner, just randomize it and pick somebody. So if you like the episode, leave a comment and you might get a free copy of the game if you haven't played it yet.
Right.
And then we'll give the other code out in a different way. We haven't figured out yet how we're going to distribute it, but keep your eyes peeled to our Twitter page, stuff like that, for some more details. Also, if you like our show and you want to help support us, you can head over to patreon.com/pixelatedaudio, or you can find the link on our website. And through a few dollars our way, it always helps out. And we want to do some upgrades eventually, so that'd be very helpful.
Well, and it helps us to keep bringing content like this to you guys. It takes time and scheduling with all these different composers, stuff like that. So
yeah, and we appreciate it. Yeah. We appreciate it. Also, if you're new to the podcast, James, what do we got in our history?
We have almost 100 episodes now, so there's quite a bit of a backlog. But some of our more recent stuff was a great episode for Yurei-kun, which unfortunately I was not on because I was sick.
But the MSX, that was awesome. We had Gene. He's been on the show before a few times, so that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and we had a really great episode for Brainlord recently, which was a really fun kind of missed
different RPG. Yeah.
And then, back to Gene with some more expansion packs. Those are always fun episodes. We just have a variety of awesome music.
Yeah. All right. So the track taking us out is the closing credits to the game. It's a great one to end on. I had an awesome time listening to the soundtrack, and we want to thank Kristofer Maddigan for coming on to talk about his stuff. And also talking to TMR about speedrunning the game, about the gameplay elements, and what makes this game as fun as it is. I think that was awesome.
We want to say another thanks to StudioMDHR for those Steam codes and just for putting in so much time to making such a great game.
Yeah, definitely a labor of love. All right, so the track taking us out is the closing credits, composed by Kristofer Maddigan. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you back in a few weeks for the next episode.
Gambled with the devil. Thought he'd win a hefty purse. Mugman came along to help him.
That's all there is? There isn't anymore. Or is there?